The Muslims, of course, inherited the legacy of the Greeks, the Romans, the Jews, and the Christians, and all the other Mediterranean civilization, including the Chinese and the Indian civilization, because that's what civilization is all about. Once you become dominant, you immediately inherit the legacies of all those who came before you, just like modern-day Americans. Modern-day Americans are the beneficiaries of the British, the Dutch, the French, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and all the other non-European contributors to human civilization. And you can see this very clearly in American society. I mean, people who are very educated and landed will know this. The average John and Jane Doe may not see it, but like those who are scholars, who are very educated, they know this is what has happened. You have a cumulative effect here. Same thing happened in Cordova and all the other city-states that were governed by the Muslims. The Muslims inherited the heritage of the other civilizations, but they had their own paradigm. And with their paradigm, they were able to interpret this inherited tradition from other human societies. And this was very clear in terms of the Muslim libraries. Cordova had more libraries than any other city in the world at that time. And of course, you had international students who came from Europe. We know some of them, Roger Bacon, Gregory of Cremona, and many others who came from Europe as foreign students, just like you have in American universities and colleges, many international students. What is very interesting, there's a very good book written by Ada Bosseman. If you read that book on international cultural history, she describes some very interesting situation about European foreign students who were coming to study in Spain. They had a hard time compared to international students today, because in those days, Latin was the common dialect. So if you came from Germany or Britain to study at the feet of Muslim scholars in Spain, you would have to get a Spanish Christian who knew Latin and also speak Spanish. And then you'll have to get a Jewish teacher who will translate from Arabic into Spanish. And then from Spanish, the Christian will translate into Latin. That's how Europeans were studying in Spain. They had to get Jews, Christians, and Muslim teachers to help them learn at the same time. That's how the knowledge was passed. And over time, many of these European students who came to study in Spain acquired the knowledge, just like African students coming to America, learning about Plato and Aristotle at the feet of their teachers. The same situation. We tend to forget this. After several centuries, of course, the pendulum will shift, because people are humans. They acquire the knowledge. Over time, they become independent. And that's precisely what happened. The European students who were coming in at great pain to themselves were gradually acquiring the knowledge from the Arabs. And as they acquired the knowledge, they became self-sufficient. And of course, the University of Padua in Italy, the University of Oxford, and the University of Paris, all these European universities now gradually develop, just like we witness today in the modern world. I mean, the Europeans who were the custodians of intellectual knowledge since the 16th, 17th century, trained many Chinese. They went back to China, they went back to Africa, they went to India, and universities crop up in those societies. This is precisely what was happening. Many of those European students who came to study in Spain, where the Arabs were dominant, gradually absorbed knowledge. What you have to recognize here, and that's why Spain became the bridge between the East and the West. And what was known as Greek knowledge, unknown to Europeans, was passed through the Arabs. Because what happened then is, but just like this happening today, many of the Arabs and Muslims who are oblivious of their classical knowledge, which is now being preserved in American universities. They come and study Islam in America. You're an Arab from Arabia. Why are you coming to study Islam in America today? This was the same thing. The Europeans were coming to study about the Greeks from the Arabs. Just like Arab students now get PhDs from Harvard in Islamic studies. Can you imagine that? You're from Egypt. They speak Arabic. You're from Iraq. You have to come to New York to be taught about your past. This was what happened to the Europeans. They had to come to learn about the Greeks from the Muslims, because the Muslims were the custodian of Greek knowledge. And you have to know the history, why this was the case. Because the eastern wing of the Roman Empire, we call the Byzantines, when the Vandals and the Visigoths overrun the western part of the Roman Empire with Attila the Hun, the center of culture moved to the east. And it was the Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire which were the custodian of the knowledge about the ancient Greeks. And since they became rival to the Catholics, the knowledge was with them. And they were now living under Muslim hegemony. So when the Muslims were ruling Spain, that knowledge was transferred to them in Spain. So if you're a Western Christian and you want to know about Plato and Aristotle and others, you have to go to the Arabs. And that's what happened. So this way, that knowledge gradually went back. That's why you have, if you read St. Aquinas, who is the leading thinker of Christendom, next to Augustine, Summa Theologica, which is his major work, you will see over 100 citations to Ibn Rus. You see, and many of those early Christian thinkers, just like many Arabs and Muslim thinkers today, they will quote Bernard Lewis and all these other people when they write. You see what I'm saying? This human knowledge, that's how knowledge transfers from one group to the other. And as a result, Spain became the center of knowledge at that time. And you find a rich collection of books in their libraries. And the Spanish Muslims became very influential, not only in the West, but also in the East. People like Ibn Rus, people like Ibn al-Arabi, and people like Ibn Hazm, and countless others who influenced the way British royalty later on would be looking at horses and how you use horses. You know, this whole idea of horse riding and the whole culture of horses, the Arabian horse, as they call it in the West. All that falconeering, you know, use of the falcon in hunting. So many other things that were taking place grew out of Spain to the rest of Europe. And of course, they came to Spain from the East. That's what happened in terms of civilization.